there folks, John here with Through My Lens, and today I'm coming to you with another photography related video. Today I'm going to be doing my video review of the FujiFilm X100VI. Everyone else has done one, so I thought, why not me? But seriously, this video is intended to be a supplement to my written photo review that can be found on Through My Lens. And that video will be a lot more detailed than this video and will have a lot more sample photography. I'll put a link in the description box of this video to the article. Now before I jump into the review, let me acknowledge that it's been a minute since I've posted a video. I spent most of my weekends during the summer at the club that we belong to poolside. When I wasn't poolside, I was usually at some car-related event taking pictures. It's been a very busy summer, but on the plus side, I have published more articles to Through My Lens this year than I have in the past several years. And I've also taken more photos this year, due in part to the FujiFilm X100VI. So if you're a fan of Through My Lens, you know that I'm a Canon guy, and I have been for over 25 years. In fact, I'm recording this video on the new Canon R5 Mark II, so let me know what you think of the video quality. And up until the pandemic, Fuji really wasn't even on my radar. I mean, I think I knew that they still made cameras, but I didn't know anyone who shot with one. But during the pandemic, I started seeing all those hipsters on social media raving about the X100V, which is the predecessor to the X100VI. And I'll admit it, it was the aesthetic appeal of the camera which initially pulled me into even looking at the X100 series. But when I did look into the X100V, I really couldn't see what all the fuss was about. It has a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor, and it's been over a decade since I've shot with a crop sensor camera. I currently have two full-frame cameras. Again, the R5 Mark II and the R6 Mark II. Now the autofocus on that camera, the X100V, is not great. There's no image stabilization. Why would I want this camera? But it sure is pretty. Now during this time I started getting more interested into trying to capture the Leica look into my photography. Not simply just making my images look as though they were shot with the Leica camera, but more to the point, trying to emulate more of a vintage film look to my photography. And at the same time, I started becoming more interested in smaller fixed-lens cameras, particularly for vacations where I don't always want to go around with a huge camera bag full of lenses strapped to my back. Now this segment of cameras also interests me because, let's face it, I ain't getting any younger. A smaller, lighter camera like the Leica Q3 or even an M11 might be a more viable option for me at some point in the future than a full-size professional body like the R5 Mark II. Then Fujifilm announced the X100VI, and when I saw the specifications, I was pretty impressed. The paltry 26 megapixel sensor that the X100V had was replaced with a 40 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, and the camera was now sporting in-body image stabilization with up to 6 stops of correction. Fujifilm has also implemented a machine learning trained subject recognition autofocus, and best of all, they kept the fast 35mm equivalent f2.0 fixed lens. Now 35mm is my favorite focal length, so it's a perfect choice for me in a fixed lens camera, all for about $1,600, which is a fraction of the Leica Q3. Now I debated for about a day after the announcement and the start of the pre-order period as to whether or not I wanted to order the camera, and that mistake cost me 6 months. As it turns out, the X100VI will likely go down as one of the highest selling cameras in history. Fujifilm was already back-ordered on the X100V, and in most cases all the people who had ordered the X100V just moved their order over to the X100VI, so double the problem. And despite the fact that Fuji opened a factory in China dedicated to building the X100VI, I still waited 6 months for this camera to get into my hands. I'm actually proud of myself that I didn't cave and order one from one of the eBay sellers who were selling the X100VI well above retail. I waited it out, and I can tell you it was worth the wait. I've had the camera for just over a month, and I really enjoy shooting with it. It's a lot of fun. But what's not so fun is doing the initial setup if you have no previous experience or background with the Fujifilm menu system. And now it doesn't help that I'm coming from what is probably the best menu system of any camera manufacturer, Canon. But a quick trip to YouTube University got me through the initial setup and provided a nice foundation with the million-plus settings and what they do. Now, the X100VI has a dizzying number of customizable settings in the menu. It's a lot to learn, but there's plenty of opportunity to customize every last aspect of shooting experience with this camera. Now, shooting with the Fujifilm simulations, the film simulations, is also a lot of fun, though I suspect I do it differently than most do. Now, most people, I think, shoot in RAW plus JPEG or simply shoot in JPEG. And I understand why. A surprising number of photographers who shoot professionally in other camera systems shoot for fun with the X100VI. And when they do, they just don't want to have to edit the photos. So they pick a film simulation and just shoot in JPEG. Now, I, on the other hand, can't imagine all my photos being in a single film simulation. I tend to use the same 3 or 4 film simulations, but I like the flexibility to choose. So even though Fujifilm and their film simulations aren't the same as filters, I tend to use them a lot like filters. So I tend to only shoot in RAW and then see how the image looks in the various film simulations. I also tend to shoot with manual controls over aperture and shutter, but allow the autofocus to do its thing. And the autofocus system works reasonably well. Occasionally I switch on the subject detect. I've used it for people most often up to this point. It feels at least 2 generations behind the other camera manufacturers, but it works well enough. The image quality produced by the X100VI, though, is fantastic. I would have no qualms about using this camera as my only camera on vacation. Now, if you want to see plenty of sample photos taken with this camera, do head over to the review on my website, but suffice to say, it's providing exactly what I was looking for in terms of the look of the images. Now, perhaps one of the biggest surprises I've enjoyed while shooting with this camera is the number of compliments I get on the camera. People never say boo about any of my Canon gear, but I get lots of cool camera comments. And, is that an old film camera? Now, for sure, people dig it. It's a great conversation starter, and it gets lots of attention from anyone who knows anything about photography. Now, customizing the camera is certainly a lot of fun too. You'll see that I've added a red shutter button on my camera for a splash of color. Now, here's a pro tip. If you're planning on adding one of these shutter releases to your camera, make sure you use some thread locker on it. Mine initially drove me nuts because it would be so easy to loosen and come unscrewed. But after a little red Loctite 242, it's been no problem at all. I also added a thumb rest for added grip, which I really like. Now, this particular model is hinged, so you can move it out of the way of the controls that it covers when you need to make adjustments. Now, a screen protector is an absolute must for this camera. You can't spin the screen around and protect it like you can with other cameras. That's because the screen really only pops out tilts. You'll also likely want to pick up a lens hood for the X100VI to protect the lens. The one I picked up isn't as fancy as others you can buy, but it does have the built-in adapter that you need when you want to use screw-on lens filters. It also doesn't add much size to the camera, and the stock X100VI lens cap fits over it too. Now, I've got an article where I speak in depth about the accessories for the X100VI that I use, and I'll link to that article in the description box in this video as well. Now, speaking of filters, I'm in love with the internal ND filter on the X100VI. This is a feature I sure wish all camera manufacturers would incorporate. About the only other filter I bring with me when I use this camera is a circular polarizer if I want to shoot cars or water. Now, do I have any complaints? Well, manual focusing with the X100VI isn't all that easy, which is why I tend to either use the autofocus or focus via the touchscreen. Now, the EVF really isn't up to the standards that I'm used to. It's a small camera, so it has a small EVF. I tried switching over to the optical viewfinder mode once, and I agree with about everyone else who has spoken on this topic that you're much better off using the electronic viewfinder. Now, battery life isn't stellar, so definitely pick up a couple of extra batteries. I have a total of 3. I suspect I could get through a day of shooting with just 2. Now, the Fujifilm X-RAW Studio software kind of sucks. Which is a shame because if you want the best representation of the Fujifilm film simulations, you need to use X-RAW Studio. If you bring your RAW file into Lightroom or Capture One, there is the capability to switch between the various film simulations. But most Fuji diehards will tell you that the images with film simulations selected in Lightroom or Capture One doesn't look as good as they do in X-RAW Studio. Now, my big problem with X-RAW Studio is that you can't output to RAW once you've made your selection, so that you make other edits or corrections in Photoshop or Lightroom. Once you select your film simulation in X-RAW Studio, then you only have the choice to output it to JPEG. And typically there are other edits that I want to make after I've selected the film simulation, which you can do in X-RAW Studio, but the controls are clunky. I just want to use Lightroom. So if you're listening, Fuji, I really wish you'd allow better integration of your software with Lightroom and Photoshop, such that after you've selected your film simulation in XRAW Studio, you can export it to Lightroom and or Photoshop. And overall, I'd say that while the camera isn't perfect, it perfectly fits the needs I didn't even know that I had. It's an extremely capable camera system that provides an entirely different experience than shooting with my camera gear, which I have that I really enjoy. Now before I close, let me say that I hear that the camera actually produces excellent video quality, but I've yet to try it. I bought the X100VI purely for photography, as I have plenty of other more capable video devices. Well, there you have it, folks. There's my review of the FujiFilm X100VI. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video. I hope you've enjoyed this production from the Through My Lens YouTube channel. If you did, please click on the like button and do share the video on social media. If you'd like to see more content like it, please do subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and do check out Through My Lens at www.throughmylens.org.